Hello. This drawing is one that I made October 11th of 2020. That was the date I created it. It probably took about a week to finish, but overall, the overall time it took me to make it was 11 hours and 52 minutes. And looking back, it seems like a lot of time. But that means that I've gotten faster, sort of creating these, which I think is pretty cool. This is sort of, especially this drawing is starting off the point where I can't really do sketches. They always turn into me working hours on one thing and it being incredibly detailed. But yes, this one took around 12 hours to make, which, unlike the vampire one, which took around 20 hours, so you can already see me getting a lot faster with this stuff. I like this one a lot better than the Frankenstein one, and I feel like it's sort of on par with the vampire one, except opposite. While with the vampire one, I was really proud of the line art and sort of just the amount of detail that went into it. This one, I'm really proud of the lighting and color, but the line art I was struggling with. At this point, I'd sort of grown out of the brush that I was using at the time, which was the studio pen, but I added a little bit of grain to it in the brush settings. That's what I did a lot when I was struggling with the brushes that I wanted to use. I just sort of duplicated a brush that I liked and then changed it a bunch to try and figure out what I liked about it and what I could make better. This is me doing a drawing assist layer. So in Procreate, if you go to where you do the symmetrical drawing stuff, you can also do perspective. And then if you do a drawing assist layer, then it'll be straight lines on those perspective lines. And so then I just sort of make myself guidelines for where it wants to go. So I do the sketch first, and then I'm like, okay, so this is sort of where these things are going to be placed. And then I try to make the perspective as close as possible, but then obviously with some things, with the bed, the perspective was absolutely way off. So then this is where you do a second sketch and then get the perspective right, and then you do the line art. So, the process is, that I do. There's probably an easier way to do it, but that's the way that I do it, to have the thumbnail and then a basic sketch, and then the perspective guide, and then a more detailed sketch, and then the line art. But like I said with this one, I didn't really like the line art that much, because I was sort of getting into a lot of artists and illustrations that had a more textured pencil feel, but they were digital illustrations, and I was trying to emulate that, but it didn't quite look right when I did it, how you love other people's illustrations so much, but you could never, it just doesn't feel right when you do it, you know what I mean? Because you're trying to emulate someone else. And obviously I take inspiration from other artists every day, but this wasn't quite, what I needed to do, if that makes sense. But if you're trying to get a more textured pencil look, I definitely recommend, looking at a bunch of different artists that do that, and to try and emulate some of the stuff. Some of them don't really use, line art. They just sort of color in basic shapes with a colored pencil or pencil-like brush, and then they make very limited line art where sort of those colors meet. So if you have a hand, they just do stuff on the inside to show where the fingers are and other things like that. But that didn't really work for me, and this piece sort of showed that. So it was great that I made it, and I've grown a lot since I've made it. But it's because of this piece, that I'm I tried it, didn't work for me, let's try and move on to something else. But I do really like the way it turned out. I do think that the colors turned out great. And, like, especially, like, going from, like, the Frankenstein one where I didn't know what I was doing, and I was trying to do, like this weird stuff with the colors, and trying to make it look like green and blue, which didn't really quite work. And in this one, unlike the other two, I actually put the light source in the drawing, so I actually knew where the light source was coming from. And, like, looking back at it, and, like, looking at the stuff that I do now, I'm recording this September 12th of 2021. Like, obviously, like, most of my pieces are sort of centered around, like, very, like, ambient golden lighting that's, like, coming off of, like, the characters, and I, like, add halos around them and, like, little glowing, like, specks everywhere. Especially, like, since I just finished a lot of the illustrations I did for Margaret Week, so, like, Margaret, like, covered in glowing butterflies and things like that. Listen to Campaign Skyjacks also. It's wonderful. But anyway, yeah, so I think this, like, I definitely have grown a lot since I've made this. And, you know, it's interesting looking back on it and commenting on it, since I did it so long ago and I can't really remember what my exact thought process was, but, like, I have this sort of, like, reflective opinion on it now. I think the perspective that I did on her and her face is pretty good, but again, don't really like the line art. And I feel like the sort of ambient light that I did for this one was a stepping stone for some of my future illustrations that I've done, as well as the color. Especially since sort of after this one, I try, you know, like a couple of different things that deviate from the ambient light that don't quite work out. And then, you know, after that, in January of 2021, I go into making all of the Mighty Nine tower rooms. And, you know, those have very sort of ambient lighting. Well, some of them do. And the ones that don't quite have that ambient lighting are actually my least favorite. So that definitely shows a stylistic choice that I've definitely started to lean towards this last year or so. And one thing that I also do right here with the line art that I did, you know, in the Frankenstein and Vampire one, but I sort of try and bump it up to the next level to see what I like about it, is sort of an under line art painting to give the line art some depth, which is basically where, instead of, you know, duplicating the layer and giving it a Gaussian blur, which I have done before and I do really like, I just make I either set it to multiply or just use the same color and lower the opacity, and just make a sort of sketchy layer under the line art, because you know how, like, a lot of the times you look at your line art and you're like, oh, it looks great, and then you take, like, take the sketch layer out and it looks, like, off and flat. And so then I just did this to add depth, and in this piece I think I went too extreme with it and definitely, like, made it a bit too sketchy, which is, you know, if you want to, like, make something look polished but still very sketchy, then this is definitely a technique you can use, but I don't think I quite pulled it off in this illustration. But maybe you think I did and you really like it, and you want to use it in some of your pieces, because I know that there's some artists that I see that, like, make their sketches look so incredible and so good, and they're like, oh, it took me, you know, like, an hour to make this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how? This took me like 20 hours. But yeah, that's something that, you know, you can definitely keep in mind with your own art, like how sketchy versus, like, how polished you want it to look. You know, how clean do you want the line art to look? versus how like textured and like granular you want to get with it. And this is me just like adding the shadow, which is definitely a lot easier if you put the light source in first and then add the shadow. And so this video is almost over, but I hope I said something interesting. I didn't say the most revolutionary stuff, but I hope it helped a little bit, and I hope you make a drawing that you really like. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.